I was genuinely into it. I was a true believer. I thought it would be this whole big realignment. And I really supported what was going on. And so someone really screwed up by hiring me, you know? Someone
So
really
But don't you?
screwed up. I don't know.
Um,
I don't want to incriminate anyone for screwing up that badly. So as to actually hire someone who is into this, I mean, that's what I call a personnel disaster. So I don't want to ruin anyone's future career prospects in the RNC or the Republican circuit.
I'm going to
But
interrupt you for 1 second just to let people know that this is a backhanded criticism slash inside joke slash what Darren is saying that and I want to ask you to explain what you thought the realignment was. But what Darren is saying is that he was hired on as a true believer and that was a mistake. That was a mistake
Yeah.
because the administration itself didn't actually want true believers. They didn't want people who were actually going to perform the executive functions of this realignment and of this new mission that we need to have. And Darren, what was the realignment that you saw in your mind that you were pulling your best Cincinnatus, you're like doing your own thing and you're going to come in, you're going to help save the Republic. What is this realignment that you had in
How
mind?
naive.
I mean, even now it seems a little bit outdated to describe it, but it was the simple kind of realignment toward nationalism, the abandonment of the kind of free market ideology, the abandonment of the sort of George Bush interventionism, the abandonment of just kind of open borders policies, which in some kind of interesting ways is intertwined with the free market ideology, and just generally, kind of playing for keeps attitude and orientation that really would, all of those other realignments presupposes a kind of certain attitude and approach to governance that Trump seemed to exemplify, in those incredible days in the campaign. So that's basically, what I thought the realignment was all about is kind of reorientation of the Republican Party to, for lack of a better term, and more kind of an America First orientation, and really kind of abandoning a lot of the counterproductive and harmful and conveniently obfuscatory ideologies that are used to basically benefit a donor class, a ruling class, and it's just so different from the beneficiaries at the elite level to how that politics and ideology is communicated at the retail level. So I thought, Trump was someone who might, correct some of that to even a substantial degree.
Amanda, did you have similar feelings when you signed up to join the administration, that you were there to make change, that you guys were going to enact, policies and guide the government in such a way that was going
Yeah.
to help make those changes?
No, I was equally as naive. And I mean, you distinctly remember the sort of sinking feeling the more and more times that you got rebuffed when you would act as though you were supposed to be doing what we said. And then you'd run into roadblocks and you'd find yourself, for me, it wasn't initially as much the roadblocks because I was really allowed to do my own thing. And I remember I talked to Darren about this when we first met, because I always tried to strengthen my relationships with what I saw as the good guys at the White House, because it was a much easier, especially because we were both somewhat in communications. It was easier to sort of get things done when you talk to your counterparts on the ground and you didn't have to wait for some order to come through this filtered system that was flawed, to say the least. So I remember just being like, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, this is what I'm doing. What are you guys doing? Like, this is what I think we should be doing. And I happen to have a lot of free reign at this bureau where I'm putting together a lot of the messaging for foreign audiences. And I remember one of the first things we talked about is I was like, I tried to put stuff together to support Brexit, because at the time this was a big issue, right? And I obviously, we know that the administration supported this, and this is one of our allies going through a similar nationalist movement. And if you're looking at it from the other side, if you were a Democrat administration coming in, the way that they take their ideology and spread it down throughout the rest of the world via these programs, if we were going to have that kind of effect, that's exactly what we ought to have been doing, right? Like the first day we came in, we should have put out a message supporting Brexit, and supporting our brethren in Europe and similar movements. And instead, we were absolutely not allowed to do that. That was considered like way over the line. Oh my gosh, you can't say anything or get involved in other countries' politics. And you're like, do you know what we do here at the State Department? Like that's kind of what the building does. And it was a really annoying thing. I mean, that was the first one that I remember. And then obviously, and so little things like that, more so than getting stopped, you also would get tasked with projects that have absolutely nothing to do with the direction we were meant to be going in. And we're basically just continuing the policies of the previous administration. For example, one of the first green light projects that I was helming, and then quickly it fell apart, was support for Nord Stream 2. Or no, support against Nord Stream 2, obviously. Darren's favorite topic. So it was the only thing that the EUR Bureau wanted my bureau to do. They were basically in an absolute just in horror every day at what we were doing whenever I would assign projects and like get stuff stirred up. And they would see this stuff come through and stop it at the embassy level. And they would be like, do not post that video. It would be something that supported what we were doing. And they'd freak out. And I remember I think they had a meeting and they were like, how do we stop this girl from putting out content? She keeps generating this material that we want to stop. And it becomes, there were very few appointees in at the time. So they were like, we can't stop her. This is really difficult. Like, how do we distract this bitch? And one of the things I think they came up with is like, we got to give her and her team an assignment. And so they were like, what we really need and what is totally in line with the administration is we've really got to push back on Nord Stream 2. Like EUR wants to support a huge campaign all over Europe to just really message on this thing. And, I remember like just not being super educated on pipelines in Europe or really giving that much of a shit because, and then it turns out that was actually the right opinion, is my lack of even giving a crap at all about where pipelines are laid in Europe as an America First person is really actually, I was right. But so I reach out to people and I'm like, why do we care? Why is this our thing? And they were like, oh no, this is our thing. Like, this is really important. Like, we really need to push on this. And I mean, that right there, that's a huge impact by having one assistant secretary who doesn't know his ass from his elbow as far as what the administration ought to be doing. That huge, push for years that never got corrected is basically the result of that.
Yeah, that's something that I want to come back to for sure, Darren. I definitely want you to talk about Nord Stream 2. But first, I want to ask you, what was the first moment that you realized?
By the way, hold on. I have to say one thing. Like, I don't know if I'm the only one that laughs as much. Are these just like, does anybody else get how funny it is that Darren is constantly trolling the Atlantic Council with Nord Stream 2 tweets? Like, I'm trying to figure out, like, am I the only one that understands why that's funny? Like,
let's make it so everyone understands. Darren, lay it out like we're all stupid.
It's a rarefied group, for sure.
Explain what this is and why it's funny, would you?
Boy, that's a long one. But basically, it's funny because in a way it's kind of an obscure thing, and you have a lot of these people, these Atlanticists, which I suppose I would also need to explain a little bit, but they're this network within, we use this term deep state, and it is useful to a degree, but the deep state is not monolithic on all dimensions. There are different factions within the deep state with different interests, and they tend to come together whenever their claims are threatened by maybe getting uh, uh, a small amount of power. But in the normal operation of things, there are different factions, and one of the factions of the deep state is the Atlanticist faction. This is the faction that is basically running the show when it comes to the color revolutions, which I and Revolver.News gained a certain degree of attention for putting into the public domain. This is the same network. Now, what does this have to do with Nord Stream 2? Well, again, I think the whole story here is, if you understand the whole story, you're up to 50% to understanding how things actually work. Like one thing I like to say is that, so much of politics, 99% of politics, so there's an intra elite game going on at the top, and that filters down through ideology, through communications, through everything, to politics on the retail level that is so far removed from what's really going on. And so politics at the retail level it's not fake in the sense that it's entirely disconnected from everything, but it's fake in the sense that it's such a profoundly distorted version of the actual things that are going on prior to that filtering process. And so energy politics is one of those domains of politics that actually matters from the elite's point of view, ruling class point of view. And a lot of energy politics has to do with pipelines. So in a nutshell, the Nord Stream 2 is a pipeline basically that would more efficiently bring energy from Russia into Europe, principally Germany. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because if the energy is coming from Russia, that gives Russia substantial leverage over Europe. And specifically, it gives Putin leverage to counteract color revolution operations that people in the State Department and other agencies like to run in Eastern Europe. In fact, there have been several occasions of Putin basically effectively counteracting color revolutions in Eastern Europe on the basis of this leverage that he has with respect to energy, and this pipeline would only do it more so. And so you can see why this would be of interest to the national security apparatus, but of particular interest to the Atlanticists, so-called because of the Atlantic Ocean or the orientation toward Europe. The Atlanticists who think that Europe and maintaining dominance over Europe and the politics of Europe is more important than politics in other domains, for instance, China and other parts of the world. So there's an element of prioritization there. The Atlantics are still very obsessed with Russia, as opposed to other factions of the military-industrial complex and others that might be more focused on Middle East, might be more focused on China. And in fact, there's another interesting dimension, which is a lot of the Atlanticists happen to be adjacent to those who are pro-Iran deal. And I think that also has to do with the politics of energy as well. So in a nutshell, again, because I think the audience probably wants to understand more of the retail dimension, in a nutshell, what this, why this pipeline is relevant is the entire class of people, the entire network of people who tried to destroy the Trump administration, who basically have played an outsized and actually astonishing role in the censorship of the internet since 2015. And that's an entirely separate story that has not been told yet, but it will, I promise. So that the role that they played in censoring the internet, and the role that they've played in essentially killing two birds with one stone by basically conflating the populist threat domestically with the Russia threat geopolitically. And that's how you've gotten all of these censorship predicates that draw upon kind of national security imprimatur, like disinformation, for instance, the whole Russia disinformation, saying all the populist stuff that terrifies them, that's Russia disinformation. And it's actually very clever. It has a certain coherence and logic to it, because you have the invasion of Crimea, which terrified them, and you had Brexit, and then you had Trump. And those three events, they kind of looked at cumulatively as a threat. And the way to deal with all of those kind of in a coherent fashion was to link them narratively. And that's how you get effectively the Russia hoax. And also you get the color revolution, because that's the model of regime change that these people are practiced in and well versed in.